Welcome to the Easy Baby Podcast, where we share practical tips and information to make your pregnancy and the first months of your baby's life the best they can be. Visit easybaby.co.za for more information on our online courses.
Hello, moms and dads, and welcome back to the Easy Baby Podcast series. This is episode 6, and in this show, we're going to be discussing some reasons that your baby might have explosive poos, tummy cramps, and stinky gas all happening to him at the same time. So first off, before we get into the show, I would like just to send out a huge shout out to parent24.co.za. They featured the Easy Baby podcast on their website. They're a great resource for new parents, and we are very proud to be associated with them. So for more information on them, you can head down to Twitter and follow them at parent24. We've got more good news this week as well. All of our shows are now available for streaming on tunein.com. So you can download the app free to your phone, to your iPhone or your Android phone, and you can listen to us straight from the phone, or you can dial into the website, just tunein.com, and all of the episodes will be there waiting for you. So as we get into the show today, please keep in mind that the Easy Baby podcast is for reference only, and it should not take the place of your healthcare professional and his or her expertise in the diagnosis and treatment when it comes to the health of your baby. So if your baby has suffered any of the things that are in this show's title, so explosive, watery, sometimes acidic, very green poos, tummy cramps, bloating, stinky gas, you've probably done some research and you've come across the name lactose intolerance. It's one of those buzzwords that's doing the rounds on social media pages these days. And the moment someone says their baby has any of these symptoms, the chat rooms literally erupt with advice like stop breastfeeding or stop eating all dairy immediately. And my personal favorite, you have to move to a soy-based formula. But why are people saying these things? And what is lactose intolerance? And is it the only cause for symptoms like these? So simply put, not only is lactose intolerance not the only possible cause, but out of the possible causes, it is the least likely to happen. So today in the show, we're going to cover the 3 main causes of cramps, diarrhea, and bloating, and when these symptoms happen together. And they are lactose intolerance, lactose overload, and cow's milk protein sensitivity. So let's start with what lactose is. Lactose is a kind of sugar. It's made in the breast, and it's found only in the milk of mammals. It doesn't exist anywhere else in nature, and for that reason, we also call it milk sugar. Lactose does get a bad rap, but it's very good for you. It helps you absorb calcium, and it supports the growth of good bacteria into your intestine. Lactose itself is quite a big molecule, and we can't absorb it as is. So we need to break it down into smaller pieces before our bodies can absorb it through the small intestine and we get to use it. So lactose breaks down into 2 very important components. The first is glucose, and we all know glucose as blood sugar, and that gets absorbed by the cells and it gets used for fuel. The other part to lactose is galactose, and this forms part of the fatty acids in your nervous system, and it's vital to the health of nerve and rapid brain growth in babies. So to be able to absorb these important sugars, our body uses an enzyme called lactase, which is made in the small intestine to break down the lactose so we can get at all that great glucose and galactose. The problem of lactose intolerance comes in when our babies don't have enough enzyme in their system to do this effectively. And when this happens, the large lactose molecules end up not being broken down, and instead they end up moving further down the intestine and land up in the colon. And that's where they get digested by bacteria. Now, this process of digestion leaves your baby with excess acid and gas inside their colon. And too much of this, and your baby starts to bloat. They can get crampy, they can have acidic, watery, explosive poos, and they get a really smelly methane gas. But before we make it sound like no lactose should ever end up in a baby's colon ever, some lactose obviously does in perfectly healthy babies without any of these syndromes or symptoms. And there is a beneficial effect to having a small amount of lactose ferment inside your colon because it lowers the pH level of baby's stool, and that allows more good bacteria to grow in place of bad bacteria. And when the colon becomes overrun with lactose, that's when we get all these symptoms. So if we look at lactose intolerance, premature babies, especially those born before 34 weeks, are very prone to this because they don't have enough enzyme to start off with. And they aren't able to break down enough lactose because they take in a lot of milk for their size. So this is called developmental lactose intolerance, and it's only temporary. It's only until baby's enzyme production speeds up. And interestingly, we can speed that up by introducing small amounts of lactose. It has also been suggested that these babies use lactase drops in order to help them break down the lactose initially instead of moving them off breast milk onto lactose-free formulas. It's very, very rare for a baby to be born with no lactose at all. For this to happen, both parents have to pass this trait on to the child genetically, but it can happen, and when it does, it's called congenital lactose intolerance. It shows up very quickly within the first couple of days of life, and it's a medical emergency because babies can't survive without glucose for long. After a while, they start to get their energy, instead of from glucose, they get it from fat. And by digesting their fat, this makes them lose weight really quickly. It puts them into severe diarrhea, vomiting, they get dehydrated, and they don't thrive. These babies need immediate attention, and they need to be given another source of glucose. Primary lactose intolerance is another type, and it's the most common type in humans. But this type of lactose intolerance only shows up in kids after age 4 or 5, and that's when lactase levels in our bodies naturally start to drop. The lactose intolerance we generally see in babies is called secondary or temporary lactose intolerance. And this happens after babies have had an allergic reaction, an infection by bacteria or viruses or parasites, or inflammation to the wall of the intestine, because that's where lactase is produced. So these babies will often have a short period where they have lactose intolerance symptoms of bloating and diarrhea and cramping, because there is temporarily no enzyme to be able to work on the lactose. When this lining has recovered, everything goes back to normal again. And if your baby suffers these symptoms and you are worried about lactose intolerance, it is a very good idea to go and speak to your doctor about it before you stop breastfeeding or before you change formula, because there are more common problems out there that cause very similar, if not exactly the same effects in babies, and they can be managed without these major changes to your baby's diet.
Please feel free to contact the show at any time with questions you may have or topics you would like us to cover in future shows. Email us at info@easybaby.co.za.
So lactose overload, which causes exactly the same symptoms as lactose intolerance, but it causes them for a different reason. It's often misdiagnosed as lactose intolerance or colic or reflux or our other cause, which is cow's milk protein sensitivity. In lactose overload, babies have the right amount of lactase enzyme that they need to be able to break down lactose and to break down enough to be able to grow and develop. But they are taking in way too much lactose, much more than their bodies can handle. So this can happen, for instance, if mom has an oversupply of milk, because engorged breasts tend to be very high in milk volume, but that milk tends to be quite low in fat content. And one of the amazing facts about breast milk is that when it has high fat content, it travels a lot slower through the intestines, which allows more time for the enzymes to break down the lactose. When most of the breast milk that your baby is drinking is low fat, it travels through your baby so quickly that most of the lactose actually ends up in the colon without having the time to be digested. So this causes the same problems as lactose intolerance. But with this, there is an added problem that the gas and the acid inside baby's tummy creates pain. And this makes your baby act like he's hungry because he starts to suck. And the reason they suck is that, number one, it provides comfort. But number two, sucking actually helps move gas along the bowel. And unfortunately, a lot of us as parents will take that sign of sucking to think that maybe the breast milk supply is low, especially in moms that don't express and don't know quite how much they're supplying. And us as parents in this position, we will feed again and again because we feel that the supply is low. But this creates a vicious cycle because now we have new food, which is hurrying even more lactose down into the colon. So lactose overload by overfeeding can also happen in sick babies. Because when babies are sick, they want as much comfort as they can get, and prolonged breastfeeding and being close to mom is a fantastic source of comfort. But what it means is that they tend to overfeed. Most babies are also just really bad at self-regulating their feeding. So if you leave a baby, they will just continue sucking whether they're hungry or not. And that sucking a lot of the time becomes misinterpreted by us as hunger, when babies can be sucking because they're bored or because they're tired or because of overstimulation. Babies also can't signal you that they've had enough, so instead of that, they just generally continue to eat until they're stopped, especially bottle-fed babies, because these babies can't control the flow of, the rate of flow of the milk out of the bottle. In breastfed babies, lactose intolerance can also be a fore-milk-hind milk imbalance issue. So switching between breasts too quickly during a feed can mean that your baby gets too much low-fat fore milk compared to that rich, high-fat hind milk. So to get the calories that they need from this low-fat fore milk, they need to eat a lot of it, and that means they have more lactose in their system. So the big difference between lactose overload and lactose intolerance is that, yes, for lactose overload babies, they still have tummy cramps, they have the watery, frothy green stools, they have the smelly gas, and they do have the tummy pain. But they are physically healthy, and they still pick up weight because they are still breaking down and absorbing enough lactose for their growth and development. There just happens to be a whole lot more lactose that's coming into their system, and they can't process it. Whereas if we look at lactose intolerant babies, they can't digest the amount of lactose they need to be able to grow. So these babies are deprived of calories quickly, and they become unwell and they lose weight over time. So the third possibility behind these symptoms happening at the same time could be cow's milk protein sensitivity. And this gets muddled up with lactose problems a lot because it's caused by exactly the same foods. And in cow's milk protein sensitivity, your baby's immature immune system doesn't recognize milk proteins as harmless, so it reacts to destroy them. Where lactose intolerance is more of a digestive condition, cow's milk protein sensitivity is actually an immune response which leaves your baby with an inflamed bowel. So the symptoms of cow's milk protein sensitivity mimic lactose intolerance so well because the inflammatory damage to the intestinal wall actually causes a lack of the enzyme. It causes a lack of lactase. And this causes secondary or temporary lactose intolerance. So these babies, however, on top of having the bowel symptoms, also have the allergic symptoms of dry, itchy eyes, of face swelling, eczema, asthma, even perhaps reflux. Cow's milk protein sensitivity gets better with age as our baby's immune systems become more developed and they become more discerning about what they attack. Whereas more people become affected with lactose intolerance later in life because our lactase levels drop naturally. So there are tests that your doc can send you for. They can be done to confirm which of these issues your baby might be facing. Your doc might send your baby for a stool test, and this is to rule out any current infections. And we also look for white blood cells inside the stool. Blood in the stool is found in cow's milk protein sensitivity because it's an inflammatory process, but it's not found in lactose intolerant because that isn't an inflammatory process. Other tests include a hydrogen breath test. Hydrogen is one of the gases that's created when bacteria break down lactose. And the more hydrogen we have on baby's breath, the more lactose is not being absorbed into the body. Unfortunately, this test doesn't differentiate lactose intolerance from lactose overload, and it's positive for both. And the same information goes for stool acidity tests, which test lactic acid in the stool. Both of them will be positive for lactose intolerance and lactose overload. A good test that you can do at home without having to go through to the hospital is that you can drop lactose from a bottle-feeding baby's diet for 2 weeks, and you can see if that makes a difference to baby's tummy. And then the trick is to reintroduce it again and see if the baby reacts the same way. A good clue that points towards lactose overload is a baby that has more than 10 wet nappies a day and many explosive green frothy bowel movements in 24 hours. So in the case of lactose overload, we can try to make sure that baby finishes one breast and gets all the fat out of that hind milk before we switch over too quickly. The second breast should be used as a dessert breast, and the first breast should be used as the full meal breast. Use your baby's behavior on the breast rather than the clock to tell you when he's finished. If you know you have an oversupply of milk, it is suggested that you could try offering the baby the same breast 2, 3, or 4 times even within a 4-hour block to make sure that you empty that breast. And what will happen is baby will get less volume, but he'll get more fat, which means he'll get more calories. And that means he'll get more calories without having as much lactose in his system. For bottle-fed, for formula-fed babies, you can try and encourage them to have a 3 to 4 hour split between feeds. You can also use a slower teat onto the bottle to make the flow happen less quickly. And also, you don't have to make sure that your baby finishes every single bottle. The trick here for overload is to find out what is behind it. What is behind the overfeeding? Is baby unwell? Are they looking for comfort? Is there oversupply? And the take-home message from this podcast is don't stop breastfeeding just because you come across these symptoms happening together. Too many moms move off breast milk because they are convinced that it is always lactose intolerance. And as we've seen, actual lactose intolerance is actually quite rare when it comes to these symptoms. And these babies then end up on things like soy formulas or lactose-free formula, and it's not necessary. We could have fixed the problem just by changing the feeding pattern of breastfeeding. Breastfeeding has even been shown to help your baby recover faster from gastroenteritis. So that means that it works well even with temporary lactose intolerance. Soy formula is not recommended for babies under 6 months and definitely not for preemie babies. It doesn't contain cow's milk protein or lactose, but 60% of babies with allergy to milk protein will also have allergy to soy. Lactose-free formulas replace the lactose with other complex sugars like sucrose, which is table sugar, or cornstarch. Now, these two can be broken down by baby, and they give babies both glucose and fructose, but there is no galactose in these lactose-free formulas, and we've seen that galactose is really important for the developing nervous system. The lactose content of your breast milk is not connected to how much dairy you eat. Eating a lot of dairy does, though, change how much cow's milk protein moves into your breast milk. Now, this will affect breastfed babies with cow's milk protein sensitivity. And when you have a baby with severe cow's milk protein sensitivity, that might even see that baby changed onto an amino acid formula for 1 or 2 weeks while you move yourself off dairy. And it's not just moving off plain normal dairies, it means looking at labels of food to make sure that there's absolutely no dairy inside before you move back to breastfeeding. So that's it. That is our show on explosive poos, tummy cramps, and stinky gas, why they happen, different reasons, and what you can do about those. So again, thank you very much for tuning into the podcast. And if you found value, please share with other parents that you think may get some value out as well. Remember to give us a rating. If you feel that you benefited from this, you can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. And very soon, our podcast is going to be on Google Play Music. That's going to be coming to South Africa in the next couple of months. And the Easy Baby podcast will be one of the first podcasts on that. So look out for that. In the meantime, have a fantastic week and enjoy your baby.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. And remember to check out our pre- and postnatal education courses at easybaby.co.za. You got this.